Hello and welcome to Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah, and today we're going to have a battle of the knives to find out which is the best action hero. We're focused specifically on the action. I break it down into the OCD, the open, the close, and the disengage. I'm not going to necessarily go in that order, but those are the main aspects of the action I want to zero in on. Maybe you're in the market for one of the knives that you see here, one or more. And this might be a useful video for you if you're really picky about action and just want the best fidget toy with a sharp edge that you can get. You're in the right place. This is the place to be. So I want to tell you up front, this is going to be 100% subjective. Obviously, these are the specific, individual knife that I'm testing. This is not getting to handle, 10 hotties, 10 Norsemans. This is my example. I have no reason to believe that these are outside of the norm. They all have excellent actions, and I think they're a good representation of each knife, but I don't actually have the experience of multiple knives for each of these, so your mileage may vary. I don't think it's going to matter too much. I can't imagine any of these getting much better for its respective knife, and everything so far that I've seen of these knives falls in line with what other people have said about their particular individual knife that they've received. So, without further ado, let's get into the comparison. I want to first introduce our contestants, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty differences. So, I have a Trevor Burger LEXK CFL. This is an $800 custom knife that I was lucky enough to buy. It's a front flipper. This is our first contestant. Our second contestant is the Koenig Arius from Koenig Knives. Bill over there. I think he's up in Idaho. So that's awesome. We've got a South African knife, U.S. knife. Then we have a Canadian knife. This is the Grimsmo brothers, the Norseman. This is on loan from Nick Shabazz. He just had it re-anodized. This is his knife. So all the action you've seen from his Norseman lately, he's had more than one Norseman's. It's this knife. So we're going to put it up against the competitors here. And then I have my Hati R. This is Van Eyck steel, excellent copy of the knife. I've had this knife for a while, and there's a lot of really nice things about it. So these are our contenders. Obviously, I've got 3 flippers and then a front flipper, not the traditional back flipper. So, your mileage may vary. Maybe you're not into front flippers or vice versa, but I like both, I think, equally well, and all these knives, I think, deserve to be here in this contest. So let's dissect rather, verbally, the Burger LEXK. Now, this knife is running on bearings, M390, and when I first got it, there was a little bit of lock stick, and it just vanished after a couple days of fidgeting with it. It is super duper smooth. So in the OCD, let's go through that. I'm going to take these apart. I'm not taking them apart, but move them aside. I want to drop on one of them. So on the open, you have a couple different ways that you can open this knife. The traditional way is the way I'm doing it right now. Just your thumb, exactly like you would open a chamois. There's plenty of ledge right here on the knife and really decent jimping. It's, I think, even easier to grab that than a chamois. It feels more comfortable to me, at least. It could just be because I've used this more than I had, than when I had the chamois that I reviewed. But ultimately, I think this is really nice, just normal open. Now, there's a secondary way to open it, and this takes a little bit more practice. You kind of grab it at an angle, and you can flip it out. If you try to go back directly, you run out of room for your finger to retract. So if you turn it to the side, it's easier for your finger to kind of continue the motion all the way through, and you eventually get good enough to where it can open pretty much every time. But it's kind of a weird angle that you're doing it. This, is going to be different depending on how long your fingers are. I have medium-sized hands, so I kind of have to do it a little bit, a different way. Some people I've noticed doing it kind of like this. I've never been able to pull it off. I don't know exactly. I don't have the fingers to do that. I've tried to do that and I just can't do it. But the open is awesome, extremely satisfying. The detent's strong but not too strong, and both this option and the normal are very authoritative and satisfactory. So on the disengage, like I said, The lock stick is pretty much gone away completely. There's no steel lock bar insert on this. I don't think. No, there's not. That's just titanium. So ultimately, though, it's very quick and easy to get in there. There's a huge chamfer on the inside of the knife right here to be able to get in. And it's very light and easy. Even though it's a strong detent, the lock bar isn't really tight here. So it's disengaged incredibly quickly. And the detent ball gets on the tang of the blade basically right away. So that, kind of experience of disengaging it is fantastic. I mean, amazing. There's nothing I would change to make this better. Now, the actual close, it's on the detent ball, is on the tang of the blade right here is where it starts. And then the slightest little jostle and it closes. I don't have to whip it shut. It's not falling on its own. If I hold the lock bar open, it will fall. I'm not overextending it too much. And usually I don't, need to do that or want to do that. I like the kind of glide shut once that detent ball is on the tang of the blade. I mean, it is perfect. It feels almost like it's magnetizing itself shut. Perfect. So that's the Trevor burger. I'm going to kind of show you the action on each one. I'm going to tell you which ones I like better. So next, Koenig Arius. So the detent on this is very strong. And for the flipper tab, I think it's perfect. It gives you a ton of authority on the flip out, and it works really, really well. The flipper tab has been updated on the Gen 3. This is a Gen 2, and the flipper tab has moved down a little bit more. I think that's a good change. It's a little bit pointy. It just needed to be kind of shelved a little bit at an angle, and I think, it would have been perfect, and that's the change they, in fact, ended up making, so that's good. The action itself is still amazing. It's not like you have to get your finger on the flipper tab in the right way. It's definitely not push button. It's got to be pulled, and it's great. 100% deployment every single time. It's fantastic. Now, on this, you've got the opening aperture, so this also has 2 ways to open it. And I use my middle finger. I can flick it from the top of the hole pretty easily, and then I can even go much further down. And then it doesn't quite go. If I do it right in the middle, it's fine. And if I do it really hard, I'm really putting some horsepower in this. Maybe no risk, though. I can open it, but it's a little bit more awkward. So I usually aim right for the top of that opening aperture, and it opens right up. Now, when you do it, though, it's not as authoritative when you do the finger spidey flick. And in my review, I talked about this, that I would not take a deleted flipper tab version of the knife, because the flipper tab is, among the best. It's in this competition for a reason. On the opening, the authoritative snap open and detent is fantastic. Now, while it opens perfectly competent, you lose some of that authority. The detent is definitely favoring the experience with the flipper tab over the opening aperture, in my opinion. So keep that in mind. It's totally doable. It's just, it feels more, less snappy and more just normally competent. Doesn't sound the same, doesn't feel the same. Now, on the Disengage, you are equally as good on the Disengage as the Trevor burger. Tons of jimping on the side. It does the thing I really like, where it actually lets you see the lock bar from the right, the show side, so it's easy to come in horizontally. You have plenty of leverage. This does have a steel insert on the inside of the blade, so no lock stick whatsoever from that, and it's a smooth transition. Now, inside this knife is a detent ball ramp, and it's the longest, most gradual detent ball ramp I've ever seen in a knife, and so it feels like you're instantly on the tang of the blade. You can't feel, it's not like a discernible hop up onto the tang of the blade, because it's a trench that goes like almost halfway to the detent ball, maybe even over halfway. And so it's a smooth, steady transition onto the full tang of the blade. So what that does is give you a very smooth, even close. It doesn't want to drop shut. It's not a guillotine. Even if I open it up, it doesn't slam down, but it does close without me having to really jostle it. Like if I just put it there, it's just gonna fall kind of on its own with gravity, nice and smooth. Some people want the guillotine shut, but I think this is perfect. This is, I'm not gonna accidentally, lob off a finger. I get it primed, and it does its thing. It doesn't pop back out of the detent. It's perfect. These two closes are very similar in that way. It's just hydraulic. This is a little bit quicker than the Koenig, but this is so stinking smooth. You could tell it was designed to close that way, which is awesome. Next, we have the Norseman hiding off over here. So the Norseman is legendary. I mean, this is one of the first, highly designed, over-designed knives that was really focused on action. The first really kind of crazily fine-tuned knife for that action that was consistent on every single knife. It's pretty rare you find somebody has a Norseman brand new sent to them that just was a bad egg. They really, really dialed it in, and their QC was amazing. And I get what everybody was excited about, but I think this is kind of like the first CNC knife that just took off that has that amazing action. And it kind of got like the darling effect of like, this was the one that started it all. So I think there's a little bit of overblown appreciation for a Norseman's action, just because this was the first, example of crazy fall shuttiness and really hard detent. Now, actually having one and using it for a little while, I did handle Nix a couple times, but it was just, while we were sitting there for a couple minutes, I didn't really get a lot of time with it. After having more time with it, I found that while there are some aspects of the action that are indeed amazing, overall, there's a lot of things that I don't like. First off, on the open, the flipper tab is basically perfect. The detent is really tuned for that, and it does open with awesome authority, and it just slams open. The thumb stud is, I don't know, you can open it. Yeah, there we go. But it's such a awkward open. I don't really see myself using it very often. I would actually prefer it to be on this side, and then I could flick it open right here. I even mess with the idea of just unscrewing it, screwing it back over, but I don't want to do that without permission. So this, if I could turn around, I think the action will get a lot better, because now I have two ways to open it. So far, we've had two ways to open each of these, and they're both, fun to use. This, only one of the two, is really all exciting for me to open. This is competent. I'm not saying it's impossible to open it. It's fine. It's just not my preferred way of opening it. It's kind of awkward. Now, on the Disengage, you have plenty of room here. I really like the design of a little kind of spoon cup thing right here, reaching up to grab your thumb. You have plenty of, milling on the show side, again, to give you visual access to that lock bar, so you can come in horizontally. You get to go right up to the end of the lock bar, so tons of leverage. That's not an issue. If you're really diligent, you need to pop the detent ball onto the tang of the blade, and when it gets onto the tang of the blade, it's right here, and so that's a little bit further than the other ones. Like this one is like a completely smooth, like it's undiscernible. It's basically like here. It's on the tang of the blade, so it's definitely a better angle. And then this one, it's even sooner. So this is right when the detent ball gets onto the tang of the blade. This is pretty low, which means that you need to very carefully control the blade to get the detent ball on the tang of the blade. Otherwise, it's going to be on the bouncy part, and it can break that tension and fall. But it's kind of an awkward one where you have what I call reverse detent. So if I don't carefully slowly move it over and I just kind of push it over, it's going to swing shut even harder than I want it to. So it's like the action that's going out is coming in as well. So you have to very carefully counterbalance that speed by having your thumb here. So I'm pushing here and then stopping here. So as soon as the detent ball is on the tang of the blade, then it can shut. So the action, once I get to that spot, is completely free fall. That's awesome. That's great. But I have to concentrate. I have to do some finger gymnastics to get it to that point. I can't just, oh, it popped back into place. See, it's kind of bouncing on that detent ball. Sometimes it falls. Sometimes it'll open back up. I don't personally like that. Next thing is that if I do let it just fall, I'm not going to do the reverse detent. I'm just going to do normal fall. Sometimes it closes fine, but I'm using it horizontally, right? If I do it vertically, it's going to pop back out half the time. So let's see if I could do... You see how I went bonk, bonk? I don't like that either. The detent is strong enough to give you good action, and to give you some reverse detent, which is bad, where it can swing shut, if you're pushing it from the top and not catching it from the bottom. But it's also bouncing right back out of the detent ball hole. I'm not a huge fan of that. So I get why people like this, especially if this was kind of the grandfather of awesome, amazing action. It's smooth, it's glassy, it's authoritative. It does a lot of things that a lot of knives couldn't do before this came out. But I think people have honed in on exactly what part of action is good and bad. Ultimately, this is just not as good as the first two. So with these three out of the way, let's go on to our last contestant, which is the Shirogorov from Russia, Hati R. Now, this is multi-row ball bearings. This is, again, one of the world-renowned action showpieces. And I heard a lot about this, and then I got the knife, and I think it met my expectations and even exceeded it a little bit. One of my favorite things is the flipper tab. The flipper tab is probably the most perfectly shaped and comfortable flipper tab I've ever experienced on a knife. It's comfortable for you to put your... it's weird. It's like bizarre. The jimping is there. It actually works without being sharp. And it just feels like my flipper tab my finger wants to live on that flipper tab. It's amazing. I love the flipper tab. Now, the downside is I only have that one way to open the knife. I don't have an opening aperture. I don't have some funky, goofy way to open the knife. However, I would say on this flipper tab and the action, it's probably better than these two flipper tabs. That's not the whole story, though, because I have the Disengage, and you might have heard of something called Shiro Stick. Now, I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of see what's going on. There is kind of a weird, it's not grittiness. It's not from, poor design. It's, intentional almost, where there's a little ledge right there preventing the lock bar from going too far in. But it means that you kind of are locking into place. This almost kind of like the Paisan did this, where it almost gets over like a little edge, and then you have to pop it out of the edge. And it kind of feels a little bit clunky when you go in to release it. It's not sticking like a grittiness. It's more like breaking apart a Lego piece or something. Like you're disengaging more than just the lock. You're disengaging the interface between the steel lock bar interface and the butt of the tang of the knife. And it's a very, I don't know, it's not as smooth. I would say of the three, actually moving the lock bar out of the way, this is probably the worst out of the four. I wasn't sure what to expect on that because I heard so much about this Shiro lock stick that I was nervous. And I was like, hey, that's not that bad. It undoes itself pretty easily, and it doesn't prevent me from going through the paces of doing all three, bits, the open, the close, and the disengage. But it's a little bit clunky. Now, on the drop, once the tang of the blade, it's pretty early. It's right here. So that's not bad. That's similar to like the Trevor burger as far as where that detent ball gets onto the Tango blade right there. It's probably roughly the same angle, I would say. And it's a very smooth close. I would say this is very similar to the Koenig Arius. I would say it's a little bit faster than the Koenig Arius, but I like how smooth and even it is, and it never bounces out of the detent ball. It's never done that once. The detent hole, I should say. Once it closes, it's closed. So, all right, let's get them all out, and let's kind of mentally break this down and see what our favorite is. I think I can remove the Norseman away. The really harsh detent ball jump here, I feel like if there is a detent ball ramp, it needs to be a lot bigger or more subtle or improved. This is a really bad jump. Enough that I'm annoyed by the reverse detent. I really don't like that. So I can take the Norseman off the table from that. That actively annoys me. So from what we have left, I think the Shiro lock stick is something, again, that is just a negative. That's stronger than the negative that either of these knives provide. Even though the open and the flipper tab is probably the best of all the options, the disengage is bad enough that it kind of takes away what the flipper tab is giving me. When these are still so fun to open, you know, the overall score is gonna knock it out of contention. So that leaves us with the Koenig Arius and the Trevor burger. Now, this is my second Trevor burger. I had a LEXK base model, which was on washers instead of bearings, and it was a completely different experience. The open was pretty much the same, and the disengage was similar, but the close was like 3 jostles to get it to close. So it's not any Trevor burger. It's got to be a bearings Trevor burger to be in this conversation. And I don't know how amazing all of the ones that have bearings are. I don't know if I just got really lucky on this, but I'm going to judge it by the one bearings version of a Trevor burger knife I've got. I don't know. Can I pick both? I think the only thing that's nagging me about the Koenig Arius is kind of the wet noodle opening aperture. It's just a little underwhelming. It's not as snappy as the opening of the flipper tab. And if you can get this kind of deployment from the flipping, like normally I can flick and get actually better. Like on the Spyderco, I get more power out of the flick than most knives on the flip. And so the fact that this isn't symmetrical between how awesome it is to open both, I feel like this wants me to disqualify it, which leaves the Trevor burger LEXK CFL. It's a mouthful. And I think it's because I can do the entire thing so fast and it never gets old, and I can flick it up. And notice when I do the finger, it's just as authoritative as when I do my thumb. And I think that's why this wins, because I can really, ring it home. Like, let's see if I could do it next to the mic. Oh, yeah, that was the finger. And then thumb, just as good. So if both ways to open it are fantastic, equally fantastic, and you have perfect disengage, you have perfect close, not too fast, not too slow, not bouncing out of the detent ball, I think this is the all-time best action of a knife I have ever experienced. So this is our action hero. I hope this was fun for you. Maybe it'll help somebody out pick which knife they want if you can get your hands on it. Just something fun to do. See you in my next video. Bye!